Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. My name's Dominic. Obviously, Father Russ isn't here tonight. He's still on sabbatical, so to speak. But that's okay. We continue on our journey because we try to keep the state of Connecticut informed, and we try to work with some of our wonderful representatives from around the state that are up for election this time around. And we know that there's a lot of very close races out there, that this is going to be very hotly contested. And I know last time around, unfortunately, I lost three of my good representative friends. They didn't make it through. And so I personally made a vow to come and support a lot of the people that I believe in and the people that I know that are up there in the legislature, not just for their own towns and cities, but they really work for all of us. And to that end, I have my good friend Michelle Cook.
Thank you very much.
Who's here from Torrington, who has been in many public hearings on the other end of my antics up there, so to speak.
Into the wee hours.
Yes. She's here. You're representing the 65th District up in Torrington.
Correct.
And I know last time around you had a very tight race. You won by how many votes?
52.
52. I think you were the tightest race in the state.
I might have been one of the very tightest.
So I know you're obviously you're the island of the Democratic Party up there in Torrington, surrounded by dangerous waters out there, so to speak. But I know your person that you were up against, I guess, decided that you were too tough for him, and so he took off to the hurricane-plagued North Carolina.
He did go south.
And now you have somebody else who we don't have to name names here, obviously. And you know, it's a relentless beating of the drum. But
it is. You know, we often joke about the fact that we fight very hard every 2 years to keep a job. That pays minimal, but it's really a worthwhile job if you are able enough to have that.
I like everybody to know, because this is obviously it's public knowledge, and everybody's always saying, well, how come we don't get our money from our state representatives? How much do they actually pay you?
So for a new state representative that's coming in the door, it's $28,000 a year.
Okay.
And by the misleading of all sorts of information, we don't get anything else paid for either. So the car that I drive, I buy. My license plates that actually have 65 on it, I pay for those. We pay for our own health insurance. We pay for everything. So we do start at a $28,000 base salary. We do get mileage, but if you go back and forth to the Capitol 5 times in a day, you only get mileage for one.
Nice.
And it's like a 54-cent.
So actually, I do these numbers in my head. So $28,000 is about, if you did a 2,000-hour like job a year, that's about like $13.20 an hour. But it's a lot more than just the time that you spend up at the Capitol. It's just the time that you spend with the people.
Right. I mean, I find myself always doing my job. I mean, from the grocery store to wherever you might stop to get gas, somebody always has something to say or a comment or a question. You know, and that's why when I took the job, I vowed to do it full time, because I don't think that it's necessarily fair for somebody to be overran by another job and then put this job as a second or a third priority. Because quite frankly, we are elected to be the voice of the people that we represent, and then the people of the state. And in my world, I just didn't see how I could fundamentally do both at the same time.
I really can't see it, because I mean, I go up to the Capitol and I see you up there all the time when I'm walking through the halls. I know you're running from one place to the next,
Yeah.
and you know, sometimes the hours can go well and past midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Do you think there ever should be a point in time where they change this over from what I know it's not really, they call it a part-time legislature.
Correct.
But do you think it should be switched over to like a full-time?
Well, so if we discuss the full-time, I can just see the viewers, and then the people that you have online that'll be going, oh my gosh, that's increasing our taxes. You know, I do think that there's a really good, important conversation to be had there, that being a full-time legislative body, you don't have to stop doing certain things as the years, as the time passes. And so we just finished our session, but we were just called back in last week to do
For
your neck of the woods.
For my community, Sikorsky
Right.
is huge.
Correct.
And it's not just Sikorsky's, Lockheed and Martin.
It's businesses across the state.
Yeah.
I mean, we have businesses in Torrington that definitely will be affected in a positive way on this Sikorsky deal. You know, and I think where some of the misrepresentation or lack of understanding about things is the general public gets very angry when you give a break to a large business. But as we had been arguing about and battling this Sikorsky deal, the bottom line is the people that are really trying to woo our businesses in the state of Connecticut to get them to leave to go somewhere else are awful they're dangling the carrot and saying, we'll give you this tax break, or we'll give you this, or we'll give you this. And as much as I do not like the large corporation tax break kind of conversation, because if the small guy on the main street has to pay, I believe the big guy should too. And there should be a fair share. But at the same time, we do have to recognize, to make ourselves marketable as a state, there's got to be some give and take.
Well, and I think the other misrepresentation in there is, I think it was somewhere over north of like $200 million. That's not in one shot.
Correct.
That's breaks out to like $8 million a year.
Right, over like 15 years, give or take.
Right, and that $8 million versus how much money does this go, because they had certain benchmarks to hire more people.
Right.
They're going to build another line of helicopters, you know, the heavy-duty helicopters down in my area. And that's a lifeline.
Correct.
That's a huge lifeline in our communities, especially, like I said, you know, the old industrial base that we have here in Connecticut, which is Bridgeports, Torringtons, Waterburys. You know, that's where a lot of these companies and parts manufacturers are set up. And if they're gone, it's not just the jobs that you lose at Sikorsky's. It's suppliers, it's everything else.
Right, and I think that that's what was so vitally important for us, and when they called us back in last week, that was part of the conversation. Not only does this keep a huge business in our state, but at the same time, there's so many legs attached to that, that the amount of towns or cities, if you will, in the state of Connecticut that will be directly affected in a positive way to this Sikorsky deal was just so vitally important. But I also think that it's important that our residents, you know, and our constituent base understand that there's also clauses in that agreement.
Yep.
That if Sikorsky does not uphold their end of the deal, the minimum penalty that they could pay, and I believe, and I don't want to be quoted, but my remembrance is somewhere in the neighborhood of a minimum of $25 million could be a penalty. And that was the minimum if they did not adhere to or meet the standards and requirements of the agreement. So we did put some safety measures in place to ensure that we as a state did not get harmed.
But like you said, it's, you know, these big deals, everybody sees the end price tag. They don't see all the little pieces that kind of go in between. And I know there are other programs that we have out there. I know the first 5 was like a big thing for the governor, but there's the ones that I think people like to hear about are like the Small Business Express, and all the other things, because I think while we like to have the big, huge,
the big guy,
the big nameplates when you see them like going down the highway, it's really the people that are doing the businesses from, you know, 50 employees like or below, which are really like the blood of our businesses.
Right, those are the businesses that are on Main Street. You know, we don't see a Sikorsky on Main Street in my town. We don't see it in your town. You know, they're somewhere else. But your small businesses on Main Street are typically your mom and pops. That's how we got started as a country. Is that, you know, somebody had a great idea, somebody needed a product, somebody decided to invent something. We have small businesses on Main. And that's, I think, where for me, if my small business on Main Street is going to be affected by certain requirements, then I think that it should be fair game across the board. But at the same time, you started talking about what that really does as a community. So the Sikorsky deal specific was an 8,000 employee increase over the next few years. Those 8,000 people, not only will they now pay taxes in each community, but now they're putting their money back into the community, whether it be through retail, restaurant, and you fill in the blank. You know, you're paying your car taxes, you're paying your property taxes, and so that's giving back to each and every community. So as much as people might be frustrated about making a deal, at the same time, we're getting it back twofold and sometimes more. And it really is about building our communities and keeping our state healthy.
It is. So now you got to tell me what's going on in Torrington. I guess what are your main issues that you're looking at for your election, and I know you go knocking doors all every day, all the time.
All the
So
time.
you must hear from everybody up there. What is Main Street Torrington talking about?
Well, so this past session we were able to lower the car tax.
Yep.
People really feel that the mill rates are very high in a lot of communities, and some of the communities feel that they're strapped and they can't lower them. But we, in the state legislature, we were able to do a car tax reform. So, the communities, especially one of mine, quite frankly, we saw almost a 10-point drop in our mill for the car tax.
Right.
So statewide now it's a 36 mill, and then the intentions are for it to go down. So 36 the first year, then 32, then 28. That's a great thing. And when people start looking at their taxes, especially in Torrington, when our mill is up there over 43, 44, that's almost $100 in savings, and it could be so much more than that depending on the type of car and the year that you drive. So those things are important, to be able to give money back into the community and, into their pocket so they can put it back in.
I remember years ago, I had somebody working for me. I used to run all the Goodwills programs down in Bridgeport. And they had to go off and pay their car tax for Bridgeport. And they were paying like $1,000.
Right.
And I'm like, and this is for some like really nice car. It was
Right.
like for a minivan, $1,000 a year. And I'm like, that's crazy. How can we have that? But I think the thing that people may not understand is, your mill rate's based upon what you have like in your community to be able for property.
Right.
So if you're in a city, sometimes the area in which you get property from is a lot smaller than if you have like a lot of other things going on,
Right.
like other housing and other things. So the difference between Greenwich and
Torrington.
is significant, or Bridgeport.
Right, and so in Torrington we have roughly 36,000 people. And we lost over the years, we're talking years ago, not within the last 8, but, several years ago we lost the Torrington Company, which, was a very vibrant factory working, industry in our town. We lost that. We've lost a lot of things, but modern technology has altered the way that anything is produced.
Yes.
So, our job as a legislative body and as a state is to help reinvent the wheel so we can continue to maintain ahead of the times. And that's why it's so vitally important to fight for our tech schools, which has been a huge passion of mine. We all go to get our car fixed, and we know that it's, $75, $100, $125 an hour to do that because there's not a lot of people out there that learn that over the last generation. We really need people to get back to work and work with their hands, and, those tool and die machinery, those are vitally important components to this. It's just as important as the World Wide Web and people that can do IT work. Mm-hmm. But we can't lose sight of what's important. And education to the things that are a priority for me is one of them.
Certainly, I know advanced manufacturing, if you go looking throughout the state, and this is really where we're going within the state, is, you talk about our big people.
Right.
Electric Boat, Pratt and Whitney, Sikorsky.
Right.
They're all employ advanced manufacturing, and I think this is forgive me for commenting on the presidential race here, but this is where people I don't think that they get it, because they're all saying, well, all the manufacturing's leaving for Mexico, all this is leaving for Mexico. We're going to shut them off and they're going to come back. I hate to tell you, those factory jobs, the way that they used to be and the way that they used to build things, are not the same anymore.
Right. And, so you take that conversation and figure out who we can get to do that work, and for them to understand that anybody that does that work is not, don't demean yourself. That is very important work.
Oh, yeah.
We all need people to take care of our cars because we need to get back and forth to work. Mm-hmm. We need construction workers to build our homes. We need people to pave our roads and make our bridges safe. We need educators to be able to educate accordingly. But in the Northwest corner alone, we have a great manufacturing industry, of which those jobs often go unfilled because of the workforce is not there. So it's really about starting early and educating the workforce and then moving it forward so we can put people to work in the communities of which they're being educated.
Workforce development is very important.
It is.
It is, and it is, and it's what drives our economy, because if we don't have the connection with the educational community.
Right, and I think that's why our voc-tech schools are so vitally important. And our public schools are too, but we've changed the way that we educate people in the public school. And sometimes for the worse, if we don't offer a home ec or a life skills class where kids learn how to do a checkbook. And we joked yesterday, I was talking to some teachers, just how to sew on a button. And it's, a lot of people just say, oh, I'm going to drop it off at the dry cleaners, to where generations before us would never live that way. They would repair what they needed right there in their home and not take it somewhere else. So we as a society has changed. Not saying it's for the better or for the worse in that conversation. It is just different. And we need to adapt to the differences.
And I think that's where some people sit there and they drag their feet and say, oh no, the whole world's like, it's not going to go back to the old days. I mean, things have changed from, even like after World War II, because that's literally what I look at when I go looking at some of these old cities, and I say was what made Connecticut so vibrant.
Right.
Was we had all these factories,
Right.
and now the factory jobs are changing, and you have to have technical skills and other things and be able to utilize computers and
Right.
be able to do it, because advanced manufacturing, people will go to China to have their little widget, and China wants all the ones that have like the factories that make all the little widgets, which are easy to make.
Right.
When it comes to consumer base and things that these high-tech companies need, they need people to be able to produce these things, which are extremely complicated.
Right. And so Torrington specific, we have a company called Fuel Cell. And then you have overseas that are buying fuel cells from us. But the fuel cell industry as a whole is not something that you can learn in a classroom. It's really hands-on skill. And so they look to fill these positions all the time, but then it's a training mechanism because you don't learn that. And so that's why I think it's so important for our businesses, whether they're small or large, to be involved with our educational system. And we're not talking about privatizing education. What I'm talking about is the public-private partnership to ensure that the students that are getting the education they need to go to work. And college is not for everybody. So if you are not if you don't feel that you are the right person to go sit in a classroom for 4 more years or 8 more years or whatever that might be, you would be that person that wants to go to work, and typically that's a job with doing, with your hands, carpentry and other things. Mm-hmm. Those are great skilled labor workers and getting a great wage. And we just have to continue to support that.
Oh, I know. I used to do it. That's how I made my way through college. I worked construction. I used to build stone walls and do masonry, other things along those lines. Right. I can go in my house and I do all my projects myself on the house.
And it saves you a bunch of money.
Oh, it saves me a lot of money. I don't think I could afford to have somebody else come in.
We just had our house sited. If I could have done that on my own, I would have appreciated it too. But
you got to know the right people to give you the little insights as to how to do it. But
well, that's true. Google becomes everybody's best friend.
It does. And YouTube and do-it-yourself like stuff is also like really good. But it is, like you said, we got to make sure that we're giving our kids the right tools to be able to understand the world that's around them. And I think a lot of times those life skills are really passed by.
Right.
And you can teach somebody how to multiply, add, divide, subtract, everything else, but if you don't sit them down like in front of a checkbook and explain how certain bills work.
No, that's very important. And because we are in the world of right now, how often have you seen a teenager carrying around a checkbook when they're using their debit card or their or their credit card, if you will, for their bank? They don't typically, and not everybody, but you don't hold yourself responsible. I mean, adults do the same thing. You might go to the ATM and you may take out $20, but if you don't have that checkbook with you and say I'm deducting the $20, you could find yourself in trouble. But we haven't taught that in a lot of areas anymore. It's like cursive writing. How many kids go through school now and they don't know how to even sign their name?
You don't want to see my cursive writing. It's horrible.
What are you saying? We can't help you?
No. You know what? One of the bills actually that you guys passed in educational committee is something that's really important to me. Had to do with dyslexia, and I know Allison from Decoding Dyslexia, because she's a good friend of Kathy Ostin. Mm-hmm. And she's come up to the Capitol. And to me, I struggled through my beginning years in school, and I didn't realize at the time that I had a spelling dyslexia. I still do. I'm still learning how to spell words. If I don't have a computer, I don't usually write things.
Right.
or I'll write them in like, scribble that
Your own language.
I can understand. But when I look at something, how important is that? Well, some people would say, oh, well, you're just helping like one segment of the population that might, go through special education. If you go into the jails,
80%.
and if you go into the criminal justice system,
Right.
there's so many people with learning deficits that went through the same thing. I mean, I happened to come around at a time when I, was finishing up high school and going into college. We got one of the first word processors. It was Multimate. It used to drive me crazy because it would flash the first letter of every word that was spelled incorrectly. So I had to go and look it up. So, I mean, I found my way of dealing with it, fortunately. A lot of people, if you don't have it recognized, go through that. And then they get frustrated in school.
Right.
It kind of translates into behavioral issues. And then those behavioral issues translate into other things where you end up involved in the criminal justice. But you're right, 80%.
Right, so 80% of our prison population, from what the last report was that I had read, has some type of dyslexic or reading, inability. Mm-hmm. And since I've been in office, that's always been one of my priorities. I have a child that has dyslexia. And I started some of my first pieces of legislation was about the IEP process. Mm-hmm. And how that is done, because we ask our teachers to do so much, but then at the same time, you also want your teachers to know what each student is bringing to the table. Well, and what an IEP looks like, and some of those can be so thick. Mm-hmm. We need to simplify that process for an educator so they can get a quick understanding of what the students are like that are coming into their classroom. And I worked with Allison for many years working on the dyslexic conversation in the tiered system of which we've been able to pass over the last several years. For those reasons specifically. A lot of districts don't recognize dyslexia because there's not a lot of specialists out there because it's so broad, very similar to an autistic spectrum when you talk about so many different layers of what that is. And dyslexic specific, and you talk about the 80% in the prisons. If we were able to get to that 80%, would their life have had the same path as if their education was different or if they learned differently? Or somebody was able to flip the right switch. And I think that vastly different when people have an understanding as opposed to what the facts are. And it is vitally important that continues. We hate to see young people in trouble. We hate to see anybody in trouble. I mean, and granted, you're not going to get rid of crime completely. But we do need to focus on what might have been missed for so many years and how do we correct that. And then we know that the correctional system is such a burden on our tax structure, that how do we do everything at the right way to make people not end up there? How do we help them not end up there? And education is one of them. And being able to engage in educating people on their individual levels. We don't all learn the same.
No we don't.
And it is, before you even label anybody, we all learn differently. And so if that's a learning disability or learning ability, the bottom line is we've asked our teachers to mainstream and teach every child at all varieties of levels, and that's very difficult. And it is important that we support them and we help give them the tools that they need.
I know. I'm going through it right now with my son. Obviously, he has metabolic disorder. So we started out with a 504 plan. We had some issues on the very first day that he went into kindergarten, unfortunately. I think some of those, I'm very happy to say that the people in Milford were very responsive towards, and our superintendent, has really helped us out within and understanding that. I know this year when we went through his first week of school, it was a lot more complicated, but I think it's complicated for everybody, especially if you have special needs on your first week. And we decided to go to an IEP because he was having some behavioral issues, surrounding his frustration level and other things. So at our last meeting, we were talking about a lot of testing. Now, I'm fortunate. I've been involved in the system, and I understand a lot of these things. My wife, has been too. She decided to become PTA president because she wanted to make sure that her kid got what he needed in school. So when I walk in there, I understand those things, and I'm looking at certain things, like he's like put some of his letters like backwards.
Right.
So I'm like, can you test him for this? And I know that when I went through school, one of my other big issues was I didn't know I needed these until I was 20. And so quite literally, you talk about learning style. My learning style was to sit on the very first seat, like in the front of the room.
Right.
And because my eyes would just get tired from looking at the blackboard, I put my head down, and it looked like I was sleeping through like every
Right.
single class. But I absorbed by hearing things.
Right. But if you don't understand that student's need or that student's inability to understand the way that we are assuming that they understand, you could have been a lost student. You know, you could have been the one that, oh, well, he's not being respectful because he doesn't pay attention, or he's not doing this, or he's not doing that. And I think that that's some of the things that I think that we sometimes miss. That just because somebody's not learning or reacting the same way as what we would consider to be the traditional student, to be able to, you know, maintain themselves in a classroom for 50 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on if you have block or not, without having an issue. And behavior, we often know, is a distraction for what you don't want somebody to know.
Yep.
And students specifically, and guys, I believe more than girls, tend to either avoid. You don't want to be called out. You don't want to be called names. And, you know, we have bullying laws in place for a reason. But there's no way we're going to get rid of it completely. And you know that people make fun of students if they don't do what traditionally you are supposed to do. And it is really about the child.
Well, first thing I taught him was, okay, you're frustrated. Here's what you do:
Right.
deep breathing. And then each day, like, you know, we go through and we talk about what were the frustrating situations.
Right.
And so he learns those things early on. I'm fortunate, you know, like I said, I know some of these things. But I think it's important to be able to have people in the school, like you said, recognize early what the issues are, for teachers to be able to have the resources to be able to say, okay, I got, you know, this type of student in my class,
Right.
this type, because they mainstream a lot of people. I know one of the big things that, you know, came around in court recently. We had this big court case talking about the educational system in Connecticut, and how it's inequitable to some of the higher school districts versus some of the cities.
Right.
And I know one of the things that I found disturbing within that, I guess, and this is a judge's ruling. This is not law, so to speak. He's saying, here, legislature, fix this.
Right. And you have 6 months to do it.
Yeah.
No, and you know, we are, as I was saying earlier, and we had started off about the full-time, part-time legislative body and so forth and so on. The Education Committee and anybody that's interested, you know, we will have a hearing on this ruling sometime within the next month. We can't wait. I mean,
No.
it's vitally important that we hear and understand the ruling, and we get the, you know, we get the analysis of it, and what are we being charged with as a legislative body? What do we need to do? Realistically, how do we do that, and how do we do that in a timely manner without compromising or jeopardizing the educational world, but ensuring that our students get what they need? And I also believe that this is about our educators getting what they need as well. You know, and does that mean that we look at how we change educating to become a teacher in the higher education world? I think that all of those things have been brought to the table over the last few years. And what do we need to do to move, you know, not only the state of Connecticut forward, but the United States forward? You know, and a lot of it has to become a federal issue, because if we start fixing things state by state, it doesn't necessarily help everybody else. We might be able to lead the charge, but we really need everybody else to support that. And that's where our federal delegations will come into play as we move forward. But it will be very interesting to see that ruling and understand what, for us, we're going to need to do.
I know it's complicated, because I know some people believe that your school systems should be set up, and it should be your cities or your towns that have a level of oversight
Right.
over this. And other people believe that there should be, you know, some across the board standards.
Right.
Within that. I mean, I think there, from what I saw, there were two parts. There was one which has to do with funding, which for our major cities, it becomes a real big issue.
Right.
I mean, I took a look at Bridgeport, which is extremely dysfunctional with their Board of Education right at the moment. Their budget is $236 million.
Right.
And you're going for $236 million. Wow, couldn't you be able to get this all together? But I got to look at how many kids that's
Well, that's what I was just going to say. How many
support.
people are they? What's the pupil population? So Torrington has roughly 36,000 people. We have elementary schools, a large middle school. We were the largest middle school in the state for quite some time, and a high school. And then we also have a tech school and a couple private schools. The budget is not an easy task. I mean, and I get it. I think that we often we throw the blame game quite a bit. Who's responsible for this and who's pointing the finger at that? You know, and the bottom line is this. We have a job to educate children. How do we do that? How do we get the biggest bang for our buck without compromising the best that we can give them? And that's a balancing act like no other. The municipalities, each town or city, they have the ability to oversee a lot of what they do, and, you know, with their education. But at the same time, you also have to set some standards because you don't want anybody to just be floundering out there and not know what the standards should be. And we've taken a lot of slack over the last few years about setting standards and, you know, teacher evaluation and this and that and the other thing. And sitting with a group of teachers last night, I explained to them very clearly, I don't think a teacher should be evaluated on one single test of a child.
No.
What if that child is having a bad day that day? What if he doesn't test well? You know, we give our children to a teacher for 180 plus days a year. But yet we're going to base what they do on one day and possibly 4 or 5 hours. You know, I don't think that that's fair, and I think that we need to support our educators in a way that we don't hold them accountable for that one single item, because collectively you're educating a student for much longer than that. And a child might not test right. How do we make it a better system for them? Better for the teachers and better for the students. And we also have got to have home life support. Whoever you go home to.
Yep.
You know, whether it is a mom or a dad or a grandma or a grandpa or an aunt or an uncle, we need to have supports there too, and that student needs to know that there's somebody in their corner, and if they're struggling, that they have that as well. And
I know, I guess it was 2 years ago, you were on the MORE Commission.
Yes, I was.
You were responsible for special education.
Correct. So what we were doing with MORE was we were talking about municipal opportunities and regionalism, education and efforts like that. And I find that special education is always or often the blame game for why we don't have an ability to balance budgets in municipalities. And I think it's important that and that's why we started that, is to dissect the two. Although they fall under the same department, the State Department of Education, it is truly two separate entities altogether. And they don't come with equal challenges. So how do we do that? And how do we ensure that those kids with need are getting what they need, and we're not taking away from the other children that don't have those needs? It has to be equal and fair across the board. How do we do that? And special education had never really been separated out at the state level. And that's why when we did that, it was so vitally important. And have meetings after meetings and with different types of educators or private schools and public schools. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? And how do we make it better? And it is something that's very near and dear to me, and I truly hope that we can continue the efforts to make it better.
I do too, and I know, like I said, my son's stuck in the middle of this, and I know, like I said, at our last IEP, we asked for a whole bunch of different testing, because I think if you can identify those things early, then you can hopefully give them the tools, or the family members the tools, in order to be able to, help their child succeed. Because I can't see a parent out there that doesn't want to see their kid do well in this world.
But it takes a village to raise a child.
It does.
And, you might have a child that has a need, and I might have a child that doesn't. But it doesn't mean that you should not have the support services that you need, or it does not make my child better or worse than yours. Every child is, they deserve the best we can give them. How do we do that? And how do we educate people to understand that it shouldn't be a blame game? We can't blame all of the downfalls on what the special education looks like. We recognize that it needs to be done differently. How do we do that, I think, is really the direction that the conversation needs to go. What do we need to change to make it a more effective system for people?
Well, I always come back to it's all a matter of how you manage a situation. And you're exactly right. It's much like everything else that goes on within the state. Everybody wants to blame everybody else, and they all think that they have the exact answers, when really what should be focused on is what's the overall goal?
Right.
How do we get there? And let's get more people's input into the process instead of coming out at the end when the end result is there and them going, well, I'm not happy with it. Well,
Right.
you're not happy with it because you're not involved. If you're not involved, how are you going to know what's really going into all of this?
Right, and we need to continue to be a proactive state, a proactive community, and a proactive legislative body. We can't react. I mean, we had tragedy hit Connecticut a couple of years ago, and we lost some beautiful children. I don't know how you really predict that that's coming the way that it did, and I hope that we never have it happen again. But we need to be proactive, not only in safety, but in all other arenas as well. And to look at the state of Connecticut, or even my own town, where do we want to be in 10 years? How do we get there? And let's work towards that goal. We need to set our goals, just like we teach our kids to. Set your goal, whether it's day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, or week to week. Let's set our goals and let's achieve those goals. And let's stay on track. Because the minute I think that we derail or we get off track because we're lost or misguided by something else, is the minute we lose that momentum. And truly, it's got to be about hitting the goals of which we need. And the goals really need to be giving those students what they deserve and being able to compete with everybody else. You know, and we need our educational system to maintain, to be number one. We need to be there. We've been there. We can be there.
Now, I'm talking about proactive things, and I know because I just read through the newly enacted laws. I know a couple of years ago you were on a task force for restraint orders, and I know we have the new law that's going into effect, which has to do with restraint orders and guns. I know you mentioned Sandy Hook, and I know one of the statistics that really grabbed me. Two of them that really grabbed me. One of them are 14 murders a year.
On average, correct.
Occur for people who have restraining orders out against a partner.
Correct.
And from what I remember, this is years and years and years ago, I think a lot of like our domestic violence laws kind of came out of a situation that happened up in your area, up in Torrington.
It did. It did, and that was a tragic event.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I think that one that Torrington learned from and tries to, you know, make sure that everything is done right. Not just Torrington, but it was a learning experience. And the woman that had almost lost her life truly had been not a spokesperson, but it became really the backbone of why people do what they do and the decisions that were made from then into current day. You know, and as you talk about the task force, I was honored I was asked to chair that task force on restraining orders, and we recognize that some of the most vulnerable times is when one person, whether it be partner, spouse, or otherwise, files a restraining order, and the time you get in front of a judge. Those first 24 to 48 hours are detrimental because anger is high. And if you're being served with a restraining order and you have that much anger and that much hate for the person that did that, and you have access to weapon, of whatever that weapon might be, the odds are that person could very well lose their life within those 24 hours. We saw that a couple of years ago, quite frankly. Look, I'm a full believer and a supporter of the Second Amendment, and I think that that's often misled and misconstrued. If you're on one side of the aisle or the other, then you just obviously can't support certain things. I think that's a misguided nomer that's not true. I come from a family of gun owners and hunters and veterans and military, and I was taught at a very young age to respect a weapon, not to abuse the weapon, but do it the right way. You know, nobody, I speak for myself, I don't want your guns. I think that's been out there. That's just so not what it's about. I do want to save lives. And if turning over your weapon for the first 24 hours or the first 14 days before you get in front of a judge, however that time frame might be, if that's what has to happen to save the life of somebody that is inevitably at a point where they have to file a restraining order, We should give that ability. And then if nothing comes out of that, your weapons go right back to you. And the bottom line is this, it's saving lives. And a victim should not lose their life or be fearful of those first 24 to 48 hours because, quite frankly, it could be months and years of abuse that had led up to the courage to go in and file for a restraining order. And I know that becomes a very hot topic and often sometimes misrepresented as to what that really is and what the intent and mentality is behind that. And the mentality is to save people's lives, not to keep people's guns forever.
No, and I know mental health and talking about Sandy Hook and mental health and some of the other issues that go along with this and really where we need to go and where we need to focus. I know for myself, I rented out like my house at one point in time. I had several people that were living in there. One of the guys was a gun owner. He became very unstable at one point, and I literally had to go over there and I asked him for his weapon.
Right.
And you know, he was. It took like a long time for him to give it up, but apparently he turned this semi-automatic weapon into like a fully automatic weapon, and I took it away from him for a period of time, and basically I said, look, get yourself straightened out. Obviously, I'm asking you to leave the house within the next 30 days after it was locked in the back of my car. But, that's a pretty scary and tense thing to do. And I think whenever we look at these situations and these tragedies that have occurred and guns and mental health, obviously, sometimes they don't mix too well, and that could be like the person actually taking their own life, too. I've been on the front line of, like I said, of having to do that, and it's uncomfortable. But, if we don't ask these questions, if we don't look at these situations, it's not black and white.
Correct.
There's a lot of like gray that goes in between here, and if we can't, as communities, peoples, or even a nation, come to the understanding that there's a conversation that needs to be had around this, then I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of these tragedies. And I personally, Sandy Hook, I lived in Sandy Hook. I actually lived within a half a mile of where that happened. I have friends that are still like in that area. That's very personal to me, and I think we need to continue to have the conversation. And I think one of the things that comes around in next session is how do we better address some of those issues having to do with mental health? Because sometimes I think some people just put it out there that mental health is like a switch that you can turn on and off. I know back to my presidential election over here, talking about people in the military and post-traumatic stress disorder. I've treated people with post-traumatic stress disorder. I know the effects that has on life. That's not somebody being weak in their emotional state. Right. No, that's somebody going through a tragic, intense event. And one of the most things in your memory is when you go through something that has a high emotional content to it, that's stuck in there for a long, long period of time. Right. Where do you think we should be going, like with some of the issues that we have, like with mental health?
Well, I think that we have to educate their community, and I think that that's first and foremost. And I think that topic has always been one of those. Oh, let's not talk about it. I'm embarrassed that, or whatever the descriptive is. Mental illness is a disease. Nobody decides to have a problem with, it happens to people. Addiction is a disease. We need to not be blinded to the realities that it is a disease, and we have the ability to help people that way. And I think that, overall there's an understanding that maybe we aren't doing enough. And I agree with you. We are not doing enough. And how do we get there? I think it's vitally important that insurance companies really take a look at how much they're charging for certain medications. There should be no reason why something costs $1,000 or $2,000 a pill. And when people can't afford to get that prescription filled, maybe they are not in their stable state of mind. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. That means that there's a perfect storm that has brewed and something is just not right, whether it be for the hour, the day, the year, the week. We need to support people with mental illness. We need to support our services. We have great services out there. And I know that there's been cuts across the board, statewide cuts in every department. And I just really wish that we could understand that certain things are really worth investing in. And this is one of them. And we need to recognize where those dollars go. Hold people accountable for the outcomes of what they're doing, but at the same time recognizing that those people need help as well. And we can't point fingers and say, you're to blame. We need to say, how do we help you? How do we do that? And how do we do that effectively? But at the same time, if people cannot afford the medication of which they need, and a lot of those medications, like I said, are over $1,000 for one pill.
Well, I think the big one
How do
that's
we do that?
coming up in the opium epidemic
Absolutely.
is Suboxone, and Suboxone, can take away those cravings for people. And I think I know we had the Shelton police up here, and we were talking about addiction and the opioid issues. And opioid issues are not just people like on the street buying like heroin.
Right.
Opioid issues are your grandparents who get like these pain pills.
Correct.
And might not realize that this is what my doctors told me that I should take, and might not realize that the addictive quality that they have within them.
Right.
And it's about educating the community, and it's not just one person or one department or anything.
It's the village.
It is.
Well, and one of our colleagues, he's, in his early 30s, and he said, I went to have my wisdom teeth taken out, and they gave me, like 30 days of a narcotic. Well, it's my wisdom teeth, he says. Why do I need 30 days of this? And a lot of times people don't recognize they need to get rid of that. So that's where we asked the doctors to meet us halfway. We did legislation where you limited the amount of narcotics that you could get for a treatment need. In Torrington, we have a box at the police department, and you can go take your drugs and put them in that box, whatever that that unused prescription is. Put them in that box, lock them away. We don't want them to be flushed into the water. We want them to be locked away and dispose
Unfortunately,
of.
that taints the water system.
Correct. Dispose of things in an appropriate, safe way. And then let the police department be able to, and at least in our community, let them be able to dispose of those narcotics or those drugs that you have sitting in your cabinet. And, often we are in denial that could be my child or that could be my family member. And we know that a lot of the addictions, the majority of the addictions start with prescription drugs. Whether the prescription was written for you or your parent or your friend, they were, it was written, and maybe it was written for the right amount, maybe it was written for maybe something that was excessive. But it's those unused medications that are sitting in a box, whether it be your medicine cabinet, a med box, or what have you, that somebody gets a hold of. And you don't realize before it's too late that one, Oxycontin or hydrocodone or fill in the blank with whatever it is leads to 5, which leads to 10, which leads to now months and months and months. And then you need more. And the opioid epidemic it's at a crisis level at this point. We have lost far too many people. And don't blame, and I get really upset when people blame the person that's addicted. We need to stop the blame game. We need to recognize that addiction is not something that I wake up and say that's what I want to be in life.
You can hate the disease, don't hate the person.
No, because they didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
I don't see a 17 or an 18-year-old child who might have lost their life because they overdosed on a prescription medication asked to lose their life.
No.
Sometimes it's just that one extra dose of something that hits you in a way that it might not have ever hit you before. We can't keep losing lives, and we need to have an honest and open conversation. We need to not be embarrassed by things that haunt us or that we might feel is embarrassing. We need to be open about it, and we need to accept people, and how do we help them? They are our community members. They are our family, and they are our friends, and they are our neighbors. We need to help people.
They are my family. I mean, in my family, I've had my stepson. He's been through this.
Right.
He got addicted at 15 from after a car accident, and they gave him pills. By the time his mom got around to understanding the depths of the problem, his father died of cancer, unfortunately, and left him money for education. He'd wiped out all the money because he'd figured out how to steal checks. He ended up going into jail because that was the only place that they could contain him at the time
Right.
to deal with it. And then, I dealt with him when he came out afterwards. And he ended up taking those connections that he had from people in jail, and he ended up going back in. And he's bounced around between Xanax and everything else. The bottom line of it is he's had an anxiety disorder.
Right.
And he was self-medicating. And we're finally fortunate to have him around at the point. He came out last January. I helped him get hooked up with somebody that I know that's helping out with a good job. He's getting his life straightened out. But he's been through methadone maintenance and all these different things.
Right.
And it's taken a long time to be able to get him to the point where, his brain development has finally come around where he can recognize these things and make positive choices.
But it's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
And we need to understand that it's right there. It's right there. And by casting stones and pointing fingers and putting the blame game, as opposed to trying to figure out how we can help as individuals and as a community, we're never going to make it better. We need to work together. And I mean, there's great efforts happening from our federal delegation to our local delegations and in all sorts of different parts of the state. There's great movement to try to get this under control. But until we all recognize and we are honest with ourselves that there is a major problem, and it doesn't just hit one socioeconomic department or one race or one this or one that.
Nope.
It hits everybody in every way of life. And that's how we have to treat it.
So I know we're down to the last 3 minutes. You think a 55-minute conversation goes slow, don't you? It goes quick around here. I know, like I said to you at the beginning, your involvement across the state, and this is one of the reasons I support so many people that are in different areas of the state, is because I know you're not just serving Torrington. You're serving all of us, and the level of passion that comes out of your voice, and what really means things to you is what's really important to me, and I want the people, because I know this will go up in Torrington as well as around through the state, to know that legislators are people, and they're people from all different areas. They're not all up there like lawyers.
I'm not a lawyer.
But they're people from your community who've taken to trying to make things better for not just their community, but for the state. And I can't thank you enough. I know you got like another 3 minutes here if you want to talk to the people of Torrington, to let them know. Obviously, we talked about a lot of topics here about why you're really running again.
Well, I know some people would question that, the sanity level there. But for me, it's really about giving back to the community. And before I took office, I was, teaching preschool and volunteering in my community for many years in a variety of different ways. And when I was asked to run for office the first time, I thought that the person that asked me was off their rocker. And I'm like, are you crazy? I don't like politics. I don't like that infighting. I don't like the negativity. I just don't like it at all. I don't believe in it. I think it's really about working together. And maybe that's what helps me do my job, the way that I do my job. It's in a bipartisan way. We have to stop the Republican-Democratic battle, and we have to realize what's for the greater good of it all. And for me, that's exactly how I do it. I start with Torrington, and I have 36,000 people that are in my community. 28,000 I'm technically responsible for, but 36. Those are my first decisions. I have to represent them first. And then second, I represent the people in the state of Connecticut. And how are those decisions made? I think we've been very good, and I've been effective in bringing great things to my community. And it's been a true pleasure and honor to represent them. And not only them, but everybody else in the state. It is an honor and a privilege to do that. And that's why I'm looking to go back for 2 more years. There's things I would really like to see finalized. There's things that we've been in the middle of that I'd like to go back and help move forward. And I hope that my constituent base supports me in doing that. I know that we go to a grocery store or a gas station and we hear what people have to say. My ears are always on. My door is always open. My home phone number is in the book, and it's everywhere, because if I'm representing you, you need to know how to find me. I'm a member of that community for a reason, because I believe in that community. We've raised our family there. I want to make it a better place.
Well, my hope is that I'm sitting with you at breakfast on opening day because we really need you back.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And like I said, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate it. I know we have some other shows coming up in the upcoming weeks. I know we're doing studio time over here in Seymour. We're not taping out of New London. So you guys have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time around. You can run the street.